I've been picking apart Blue Lock for 2 years by this point, and I'm still constantly blown away by the insane degree of intentionality behind everything in this edgy football comic. And that ranges from the narrative as a whole to entire matches up to individual chapters. So this time around, I want to zoom in on a micro level and show you the secret formula that turns most every chapter into a meticulously crafted masterclass in writing. And I guarantee that you'll never again read the manga in the same way. Hello, my name is Sean, and this might well be the most hubristic project I've ever attempted. Hey, Future Sean here with a bit of a channel update. I'm currently in the process of turning my PhD dissertation into a book, and the manuscript is due by the end of the summer. For that reason, I'm unfortunately going to take a bit of a break from YouTube to give the book my full attention. I really don't have a good idea how long that'll take. Maybe I finish in 3 weeks, maybe it takes 2 months. In all honesty, it's a bit frustrating because I have so many Blue Lock videos I want to put out right now, but finalizing the book has to be my top priority at the moment, so sorry about that. Also, just to note, I will still be keeping up my Patreon podcast. I put out a 15-minute podcast every week, 15-ish minutes, kind of depends on the week a bit, where I give my first thoughts on a new Blue Lock chapter, which you can access for €5 per month. You can get a free 1-week trial as well if you're interested. So if you really don't want to miss me, you might want to just check out that. Let me start with a general principle. With a skilled writer at the helm, a manga chapter isn't whatever you can cram into the arbitrary amount of pages designated by the publisher. My metric for a good chapter is a coherent and satisfying piece of art in its own right, and Blue Lock is among the best examples of this principle I've ever encountered. So, without any further ado, the basic formula for most every Blue Lock chapter. Pretty much any chapter in this series consists of 3 elements. Firstly, the chapter contains 2 main sequences. Let's call them Sequence A and Sequence B. With sequence, I mean a series of consecutive pages that focus on one character, idea, or moment that is in some way separate from the other sequence of the chapter. And finally, there's a red thread that connects these 2 sequences, which I'll be calling the bridge. The bridge is where the magic happens. Basically, the very fact that these 2 sequences are combined into a single structural unit, an 18-page manga chapter, imbues them with an extra layer of meaning that they wouldn't have on their own. Now I know this is all kinda abstract, so let me illustrate what I mean with one of the best examples of this writing principle in the series, Chapter 207. In Sequence A, Nagi and Reo reflect on and celebrate their accomplishments in the Manshine match while Reo dries Nagi's hair. Reo then suggests that Nagi strives for a 300 million yen salary. Nagi in turn remarks that it feels like back when they were first playing together, and thanks Reo for getting him fired up about football. The chapter then segues to Sequence B, which focuses on the dynamic between Kaiza and Ness. Ness brings Kaiza his glasses, with Kaiza explicitly thanking Ness for his services. Kaiza then highlights how Isagi is different from all the other players whose spirit he'd broken before. Next, we're told that Kaiza's motivation for participating in the NEL is to secure a higher offer for himself from a different team. The chapter ends with Kaiza cackling like a madman about Isagi being ripe for the picking, while Ness seethes with envy that Kaiza is fired up about another man. The bridge in this instance is quite apparent. This chapter, aptly titled 2 Pairs, explores the dynamics of 2 of the series' most prominent duos. Both of these scenes, however, gain so much more in significance by the way they're juxtaposed in the same chapter. And once you start dissecting the parallels, you'll find that most every aspect of each scene maps onto something in the other sequence. To start with, there's talk of money, of offers, on both sides. At first, you might think that Reo's proposal about the 300 million yen salary would be in line with Nagi's own desires. In Kaisa's case, however, chasing after a higher bid is a sign of cowardice. It's a compromise born from his acceptance that he doesn't have what it takes to surpass Noah. So with that, it's highly implied that for Nagi too, pursuing monetary gain is a dead end, especially in the face of his own inability to envision himself as the world's best. But more than that, the comparison between the two duos raises important questions about partnership and codependency. Reo attending to Nagi with a hair-drying scene seems innocuous, cute even. But then, we see Kaisa using Ness as his servant much more conscientiously, and even subjecting him to abuse. So with that parallel established, the manga invites us to consider Nagi's behaviour in a much more sinister light. Isn't Nagi also, deliberately or not, manipulating Reo's emotions and subordinating his partner's needs to his own desires? After Nagi and Reo reunited in the Manshine match, the manga strongly suggests that this may not be for the best in the long term. That idea is reinforced when their next appearance compares them to a pair that's on the verge of collapse. Ness and Kaisa are rapidly approaching the brink of insanity, and at least in Ness's case, this is wholly the result of his disturbing preoccupation with Kaisa. In that light, let's talk about the two strikers' fires. Nagi admitted that playing with Reo got him heated up like nothing before. At the current moment, however, he doesn't have the fire to strive for the top of the world, and Reo's suggestion doesn't spark any new flames either. Flash forward to the next scene, where Ness realizes that Kaisa is no longer fired up because of him either. The message is clear, I think. Merely subordinating yourself to the desires of another player will never ignite their passions in the way that Isagi evidently can. All these parallels raise fundamental questions about whether Nagi and Reo have sealed their fate, if they're at risk of going down a self-destructive path if they don't find a healthier way to coexist. Now, I probably didn't need to go into such extensive detail about any of this, but I hope the idea is clear. This chapter is divided into two parts which deeply gain in meaning by the way they are compared and contrasted. Still, you might not be fully convinced that this one example is representative of a general pattern in Blue Lock's chapter writing. So, to test my hypothesis, I've generated 20 random chapter numbers, and we'll see how well this formula holds up. I also suspect that many of these won't be nearly as neat as the example I just gave, but I hope to convince you that this principle applies nonetheless in almost every instance. Chapter 74, Monster. Sequence A. Bachira, Aryu and Tokimitsu showing the same level of coordination and chemical reactions that allowed Isagi's team to score in the previous chapter. Sequence B. Rin displaying such extraordinary abilities that he can pass by 3 opponents and score all by himself. Bridge, chemical reactions versus individual strength, which are the 2 keys to clearing the second selection. So Rin's team showcasing both principles right out of the box is evidence that they're still a step ahead of their challengers. Chapter 167, Crossflow. Sequence A. Kunigami and Isagi attempting to hijack passes from their German teammates. Sequence B. Isagi's pass to Kunigami, which results in the winning goal against FC Barca. Bridge. The Blue Lockers taking over Bastard München. First, by disrupting their pre-existing system, and then by offering a different pathway to score goals. Chapter 208, 100%. Sequence A. Isagi shows off his existing skill set, from hiding in his opponent's blind spots and direct shots, to playing by reflex and metavision. Yet, despite everything he's gained, he's by his own admission still lacking something crucial to becoming the world's best. Sequence B. Igarashi inspires Isagi to devise a new theory that's guaranteed to beat Kaiser. Bridge, Isagi's developments, past and future. This chapter reinforces that his insatiable drive to adapt and improve is the reason why he's about to overcome Kaiser and inspire Hiyori in the next match. After all, we've already seen this principle all the time in previous Blue Lock arcs, and the results speak for themselves. Chapter 22, Until this bridge burns out. Sequence A. Chigiri's rebirth as a striker and declaration that he'll keep fighting to be the best in the world until his fire burns out. Sequence B. The introduction of the aces of Team V, highlighting Nagi's complete lack of interest in anything around him. The chapter then concludes with Isagi declaring war on Nagi. Bridge, fire, passion, and in particular, Isagi's role in igniting the fire of others. Firstly, the way this chapter invites comparison between Nagi and Chigiri brings Nagi's flaws to the fore even more strongly. After all, Chigiri was quite similar to Nagi not too long ago. But more than that, combining the payoff of Chigiri's rebirth with Isagi challenging Nagi already suggests that Isagi might be able to work the same magic with Nagi as he did with Chigiri. Chapter 191, Here I Come. This one admittedly doesn't have a very clean break between the two sequences, but I do think there is a dichotomy of ideas at the very least. Sequence A. Isagi trying to uncover the formula that allowed Nagi to score his super goal in the Manshine match, and coming to realize how Nagi entered the flow state. Sequence B. Agi giving up on Nagi after he casts aside Manshine's teachings, followed by Isagi declaring that he'll prevent any more miracle goals. The sequence concludes with Nagi wavering about what's next for him. Bridge, do's and don'ts for becoming the world's best. One of the most important concerns of the Manshine match as a whole is discovering which pathways lead to the top and which ones are dead ends. So by having Isagi understand both what led Nagi to surpass everyone on the field and what won't work in the long run, he gains the insight that allows him to finally surpass Kaiser at the end of the match. Chapter 89, Demon. Sequence A. A philosophical confrontation between Kunigami and Shido on the nature of fairness, with each of them setting out their views on what's fair and unfair. The two teams then agree to face off against each other. Sequence B. Igarashi draws a foul from Reo and Shido scores the first goal of the match. Bridge, fairness. The match is as it were a testing ground between Kunigami's and Shido's philosophies. Igarashi's foul might be cheating in Kunigami's moral framework, but for Shido, football is a canvas of life that isn't confined to outdated rules about sportsmanship. And with Shido scoring the first goal of the match, the narrative effectively justifies his philosophy over his opponents. Chapter 11, Foreboding and Intuition. Sequence A. Team Y gains the clear upper hand with Okawa's goal and subsequently stalling for time. Team Z then starts second guessing themselves and almost abandons their plan altogether. Sequence B. The second half starts and Team Z regains momentum, proving that their approach is effective. Isagi, however, senses that something is awry and abandons formation. Bridge, when to change course. We're given examples of both the right and the wrong reasons to abandon one's plan, which feeds into the match's overall message. While the potency of tactics is clearly established, Nico's strategizing is ultimately overcome by one assertive individual. Chapter 54, Devour. This one is very on the nose. Sequence A, Naruhaya tries to make a direct shot to score, but when push comes to shove, he fails to match Isagi's abilities. Sequence B, Isagi realizes that Naruhaya's off-the-ball movements are the exact skill he needs. He then charges through Barrow's blind spots to pass him by and score the winning goal. Bridge, Adaptability. Isagi and Naruhaya both realized that their combined skill set would allow them to hold their own against more talented players. What ultimately distinguished the two was Isagi's superior ability to change and adapt in the face of adversity. Chapter 235, The Reason I Was Born. With this one, I'll straight up admit that I don't think it follows the formula. It's the one with Hiyori facing the dilemma of whether he should pass or shoot. I could maybe make an argument that there's a contrast of listening to others versus making your own decisions, but in all honesty, I'd be forcing things if I tried to separate the scene into two distinct sequences. Chapter 84, Initial Impulse. This is another atypical one, in that the first sequence occupies virtually the entire chapter, but I do think the formula applies nonetheless. Sequence A, Bachira's Awakening, where he hogs the ball until he breaks past all his opponents on his own, and positions himself to score. Sequence B, Isagi intercepting Bachira's shot at the last minute. Bridge, Reliance on Others. Bachira realizes that he's become completely dependent on others, whether imaginary or real, and breaks his curse by returning to his lonely childhood football. At the very last moment, however, Isagi refutes his newfound belief that you can only excel if you stop believing in others. After all, he alone surpassed his friend during his greatest performance in the story by trusting in Bachira's abilities. Chapter 239, Produce. Sequence A, the Uber's minds are blown by Isagi and Hiyori acting completely in sync. Sequence B, Hiyori rejects Isagi's attempts to subordinate him and for the first time in his life articulates his own desires to the world around him. Bridge, How to cooperate with others. From the outside, it looked like Isagi and Hiyori are in complete alignment, but in actuality, it's a marriage of convenience with both players using the other to fulfill their individual desires. That's in Blue Lock's worldview the only way players can mutually elevate each other. Chapter 217, Predator Eyes. Sequence A, Isagi dissects Barrow's first goal of the Uber's match, concluding that it came from his newfound Predator Eye. Sequence B, play resumes, with Isagi intercepting the ball with his metavision. Nico then starts using metavision himself. Bridge, Types of Vision. This chapter shows us that there are different ways to use your eyes successfully in high-level football. Chapter 93, Gathering. This is one where, in all honesty, there are very clearly two sequences, but I'm not entirely satisfied with my reading of the bridge. Hit me up if you've got a better interpretation in the comments. Sequence A, Isagi's team studies English because that's what's necessary if they want to reach the professional level and communicate with foreign teammates. Sequence B, unveiling all of the teams that have passed the second selection. Bridge, my best guess is future teammates. Keep in mind as well that the chapter ends on a cliffhanger. The hairstyle in the shadow suggests that Kunigami passed, only for the twist next chapter to be that it's Shido instead. So by implication, our protagonists will have to deal with Blue Lock's biggest problem player rather than their reliable former teammate, just as how they'll have to navigate unfamiliar international environments with players like the World 5 going forward. Chapter 259, Impossible Challenge. Sequence A, Shadows lacks motivation and causes Rin to lose the ball. Kurona then gets the ball and tries to pass to Isagi, but his pass is intercepted by Kaiza. Sequence B. We learn about Kaiza's new technique, but because Ness couldn't give the right pass, he whiffs the shots and descends into madness. Bridge. Passers fallen short. Charles has left Rin hanging. Kurona doesn't take account of Kaiza's antics, and Ness finally fails to provide the support needed to make the Magnus shot work. Chapter 8. Message. This one is very straightforward again. Sequence A. Team Z reflects on their loss against Team X and on how to proceed from here. Sequence B. Ego's speech about the true nature of a striker and how they must take arms with their personal weapons. Bridge. The need for overwhelming individuality. The first half of the chapter sees Team Z engage in a dialectical process to distill lessons from their previous match, culminating in them internalizing some of Blue Lock's core teachings. The second half then sees Ego reinforce and contextualize their conclusions, as well as showing them the next step. Chapter 242, Wizard and Blue Rose Part 1. Sequence A. Ness being rejected by his family for his fascination with the supernatural. Sequence B. Ness entering the world of football, leading up to his first encounter with Kaiza at the Bastard München tryouts. Bridge. Reason versus magic. The first half establishes this basic dichotomy, allowing the second half to explore to what extent there is space for the inexplicable in the world of football, culminating in Kaiza seemingly validating Ness's pursuit of the impossible. Chapter 89 and 242. Wait, I've already done those. Long live random number generation. Let me reroll these ones. Chapter 152, Restart. Sequence A. Rin reflects on the destructive impulses that bubbled to the surface during the U20 match. He then vows to change so that he can overcome his two rivals. Sequence B. Isagi reflects on how he's changed in Blue Lock and changed the world in turn. The chapter ends with his yearning to return to Blue Lock. Bridge. Change. What distinguishes Isagi and Rin, both in the U20 match and going forward, is that they, more than anyone else in the series, have embraced and will continue to embrace change. Chapter 252, Peak Performance. Sequence A. The manga highlights Hiyori's successes and how they came about from him operating in tandem with Isagi. Sequence B. Shido scores because his and Charles' visions of the best possible play intersected. Bridge. Collision of peak performances. The chapter first reminds us of how Hiyori being completely in sync with Isagi lets him make game-changing plays. That underscores how big of an impact it has for Shido and Charles to reach the same level of chemistry and justifies the first goal of the match. Chapter 23, Until He Met. Sequence A. Team Z watches footage of the most recent match in their wing and acknowledges Nico's development. Sequence B. Reo insists that Nagi doesn't need to practice, leading into the Nagi-Reo flashback. Bridge. Desire. This one has a few layers, so let me unpack. On the one hand, there's a crucial contrast with Nico becoming more assertive and striving for his own goals in a desire to survive, versus Nagi putting in no efforts to improve whatsoever. This is also the reason why Isagi, who sees a kindred spirit in Nico, has set his sights on Nagi, who in contrast ignores his surroundings altogether. Also, this probably goes without saying, but the reason why Team Z is analysing its rivals is because they have a deep desire to survive and reach the next selection. That brings me to Nagi's better half, who's a rather ambivalent figure in terms of desires. At the start of the flashback, Reo is characterised as the person who could have anything he wanted, but wanted nothing, which is not all that dissimilar from Nagi's vapid desires. Of course, he does eventually land on two deeply intertwined wants: a World Cup victory and Nagi as his partner. Yet, if we look at Reo in the present, he doesn't seem to be putting in much effort to actualize either of his desires. in marked contrast, of course, to the less gifted players in the other teams. I also just, and this is off the cuff, realised maybe a second bridge here as well, because the chapter is called Until They Met, and it kind of highlights the impact of different meetings they have on the various players. So like, Nico met Isagi, and then he starts trying to play like a more assertive striker. Isagi met Nagi, and he's fully fired up to win the final match. And then finally, of course, there's the big meeting between Nagi and Reo. So I think it's just really cool that there's even so much more synergy between all these various bits in the chapter. Chapter 210, Ace Eater. Sequence A, Bago asserts dominance over Isagi, followed by Isagi vowing to put his training into practice with a goal of his own. Sequence B, Kaisa's faction perfectly executes their attack, only for them to be intercepted by Don Lorenzo. Bridge, Rival Kings. The chapter sets up the match as a war for Blue Lock's throne and establishes that both teams host two kings, something that is explicitly spelled out for the Ubers in the next chapter. And so, the opening of the first match pits the two contenders for Blue Lock's throne against each other, and then in parallel, the two rival Next Gen 11 members. And that's it. Not gonna lie, I was quite nervous about trying to substantiate my theory with a completely random dataset. That felt like hubris in the making. At the same time though, it seemed deeply intellectually dishonest to just cherry pick examples so that my claim appears stronger than it is. Also, scientific disclaimer, all of this is in no way mathematically conclusive. Apparently, I need a sample size of 59 chapters if I wanted to make statistically significant findings. And, I don't know, I don't think anyone's really waiting for me to go on even longer than I already have. Moreover, I fully acknowledge that there is a certain degree of subjectivity in how you delineate the two sequences. In all fairness, many of the chapters I surveyed have a very clean break. Examples include ones where one half features Team Z and the second half features Team V, or when the first half takes place before the match commences and the kickoff demarcates the start of the second half. In others, though, there's no clear-cut moment of transition, so I completely understand if you're not convinced of every single one of my findings. Nevertheless, I do hope I've been able to pinpoint stronger or weaker versions of this writing pattern in 19 out of 20 randomized chapters, and that seems quite suggestive to me that I'm not imagining things. So, I hope that I've been able to convince you that Blue Lock's writing is even more meticulous and impressive than you already thought, even if you don't fully agree with every single one of my interpretations. Also, if you do kind of agree with my idea, I'd love to see you all try your hand at applying the AB bridge formula in the comments to the most recent chapter at the time you're watching this. But before I let you go, I want to shout out my €10 patrons. Local Sass Boy, Jesus Cujo, Melody, Patrician Pat, and Orangey Legend. I also want to thank Gabriel Lewis for his help editing my recent videos. You're the real ones. I can't stress enough how much I really appreciate your support. In any case, until next time, Slangafall.